Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes, your host of the iKnow Media Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity through empirical experience alongside reasoned analysis and application. Today's show, once again, 45's behavior. I feel like I'm talking about little Johnny and what did he do today? So he's threatening to withhold federal funds, federal education dollars from states that are teaching the 1619 project. So in our last show, we talked about diversity training being removed from federal agencies. And now we're talking about going into the public schools of the United States of America and withholding money. And so like a good mob boss ties money to everything, and like someone who's a totalitarian leader and controls the purse strings and says, I'm going to give money to people I like and take it away from people I don't like, here we go again. So the problem is, as I said, he threatened to withhold money. And essentially the 1619 project is a Pulitzer Prize winning project that talks about, it goes back to the beginning. It goes back to 1619. And it's a series of essays published that talks about the history of slavery in the United States. I've gone a little far before introductions. Elisa, tell us who you are, please.
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide, and tonight's conversation as a teacher disturbs me deeply. That a president of our country would do what this man has just out loud said he was going to do.
Hi everyone, I'm Jay Ellis, and I'm a mom of 3. I'd like to consider myself a teacher to my children. But our topic today, I took this really personally. I'm going to tell you honestly. Not that I don't take a lot of what Donald Trump does personally, but this just felt like a really serious and deep personal attack. And so I'm kind of looking for a way to process this and be constructive about it, because I really am angry and disgusted about it.
Well, I think you ought to be angry and disgusted about it. And like our last show, we're going to have another teacher on, Elisa, Keisha Rivers, our producer. She'll be back. She used to teach public school some years and years and years ago. Although she had little bitty kids, we're talking about curriculum. So essentially, what Mr. Trump is saying is, don't believe what the 1619 project is saying, because it's teaching you once again, just like diversity training, that America is evil. And we don't want you guys to really have any compassion for other people. We want you to remain afraid of folks that don't look like you and believe the narratives. And we want to make America great again. When we didn't talk about all this foolishness, when these homosexuals needed to be in the closet, when women needed to be in the kitchen, when these black people needed to shut their mouths and go in the back door. That's what he wanted. That's what he wants, I believe. Sounds a little strong, but Jay, why don't you start us on this one today?
I believe that's what he wants too. I think that part of what is real difficult for me, at least when I think about this, is it's not just that he doesn't want the history taught. He's actually arguing that the history is incorrectly told.
Yes.
And that's not true. And we have been fighting a battle for a while now to get an accurate portrayal of Black history in this country, the role that Blacks played prior to the civil rights movement. It's like in history class in school, you hear that there's slavery, and then there was the civil rights movement, and there was MLK, and there was Malcolm X, and that was it. Maybe you learned about George Washington Carver, right? So now we're asking for a broader description of the Black experience in America and the impact that it's had on our culture and our success. And he wants to shut that down, and he wants to say that this is not true, the way that this is being portrayed. He has no respect for the fact that it won a Pulitzer Prize. He doesn't respect anything like that. And unfortunately, his base doesn't seem to either. And that is very frightening, because the 1619 project it's still in its youth. It's still in its infancy. So it's possible that a lot of America would never accept this as being true, and we need them to. This was a beautiful project, and something that really explained the Black experience from the start of being brought here, and saying that our nation started then. right, in the 1600s. That's when our nation started, and our nation became successful because of the work of Black people. And we need that history told properly, because that's also where, if people can understand that history, it's quite possible that they will see more value in a Black life. So it's scary that he's trying to eliminate that.
So once again, false narratives. If we can quell or squash this thing called the 1619 Project and say that it's un-American and say that it's not real and say that it's, you know, unpatriotic, then there's a certain amount of people that we call his baits that'll never give it a shot. What do you got, Elisa?
So one of my most annoying things that people teach in school is Christopher Columbus discovered America, and I'm real passionate about it. And I think that if you feel like Christopher Columbus discovered America, you need to stop right there and go back to school. But there's even this little chant that we learned about it, you know, in what was it, 1842? What was it? What's the chant? I forgot the chant. It's 1492 Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It's this whole little thing, and it's a lie. And this is okay to teach to students, but we can't teach them the real history. The other thing that goes, that for me, that the reason why teaching history isn't, you can't rewrite history. You can't see the facts and then give a different explanation of what happened, because then that's not history, that's your point of view. And with the 1619 Project, more people would be more American students would be able to tell you when we pretend Columbus discovered America, then they could tell you the first year an African person was brought here and enslaved. And that's crazy. Like, this is a lie that they could tell you, but they can't tell you this truth. And for our president to go out and tweet out, once again, this man should not tweet, but for this man to tweet out that he's going to withhold federal funding from schools if they choose to teach this, where was that passion when they were teaching in the history books just a few years ago? The new rewrite of the history books was that during the 16, 17, and 1800s, Africans came to America for new jobs. There's no passion there. We weren't going to withhold that narrative. So I think that regardless of how you feel about Trump, if you're a Trump supporter, this is one of those moments, along with the diversity training, where you need to stop and you need to publicly speak out and say, oh, no, this went too far. I want my child to learn history. I understand the value history gives. And I also understand that if you don't teach your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And we're repeating ours. So, like, let's get on there, people.
So I chuckled because, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, I can find some humor in almost anything. It's crazy, but when you mentioned that they were teaching a few years ago that Black people came from Africa here in the 1600s looking for jobs, I chuckled because I remembered an illustration that I saw of a white man and a woman and a kid sort of maybe on the dock next to a ship, and a Black man, an African, like in a top hat and like European clothing, and a wife in the same, and a little kid, and they were shaking hands. So like they were greeting them off the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's, I talked in the last show about A Clockwork Orange and just banning books at some point. We're talking about either false narratives, rewriting history, which was already rewritten, but solidly redoing it again. And then, you know, going with these things that Mr. Trump wants us to believe, right? Using money as holdbacks, putting his people in jail. I know it doesn't sound like a connection, but it's a connection, right? Mm-hmm. Dictators put people who are against them in jail. He's walking up to the line. He's asking Bill Barr to investigate people that he considers his enemies, which are just political rivals. He is telling you, don't believe, I said it in the last show as well, don't believe your eyes, believe what I say. Forget about science, it's about our policy and what we want. And that base, based on their fear, is believing it. So I think we've got Keisha back again to talk about this 1619 Project and 45's weighing in on it. You want to introduce yourself again and tell us what you think about today's topic?
Yeah, thanks for having me again, guys. I'm Keisha Rivers. I am President, Chief Outcome Facilitator of the CARS Group, where we facilitate outcomes by equipping people to embrace and manage change. I am a former educator, as Kenny mentioned. I actually have a master's in an undergrad and a master's in curriculum and program instruction with a concentration in leadership. So I have been writing school curriculum and teaching and educating. You know, little kids are my favorite, but I have been teaching at the college level and everything in between. So this whole notion of rewriting or really just silencing the truth of history in order to make it more palatable is utterly ridiculous. The 1619 project is long overdue. And it came about because August of 2019 was the 400th anniversary of when the first slaves came to this country. And we teach kids all the time that this country started in 1776 when, you know, with the independence and the Declaration of Independence and all of that. But we don't teach them that there were people here in 1619, and in 1619, 20 to 30 slaves arrived from Africa. So racism is an integral part of this country's history. This country was built on the backs of slaves. There is nothing that happened in this country that did not happen because of slaves, included slaves, or impacted the way Black people are treated in America to this day. And the 1619 Project is the first time that they are actually taking an honest look at that and not just studying slavery as a unit of time or mentioning it in the history books, but they're actually going beyond and talking about, you know, what that means for as far as mass incarceration, what that means with the medical system and health disparities, what that means as far as social economic issues, what that means as far as the large issues of crime. So this is a reckoning. This is holding a mirror up to America and saying, look, you guys are ugly. This was some foul stuff that you did. And now he's like, we don't want to fund any school that's teaching the truth. The whole reason why people...
So you're right. Cut you off on that, we'll come back.
Yeah.
We don't want to fund any school that's teaching the truth. One of my pet peeves, thank you for that lesson. But one of my pet peeves is when people say the slaves. They weren't slaves, they were enslaved Africans. Mm-hmm. There were no slaves brought here. These were Africans that were brought here and enslaved Africans. Now, with that said, given 1619 to 1776, with this whole independence from basically the tyranny of, was it King George? Whomever it was, the independence from England, we were already 150, the United States, well, we weren't the United States even then, but America was already 157 years strong in the slavery in 1776. What do you think about that, Jay Cherie?
Well, I mean, there's an irony in it, first of all, that our nation was founded because people were trying to escape religious oppression, and that we came in and started a country where we oppressed others, and we did it so well that we became prosperous through the oppression of them. I think there's a certain irony in that. But I also think that, you know, we probably shouldn't be surprised that this is happening, because we've been having this discussion for so long about just the Confederate monuments, right? Mm-hmm. And what that means and why that's offensive. And that if these monuments do stay, we should at least tell the whole truth, right? We shouldn't have a monument for Andrew Jackson and not talk about the Trail of Tears, but we do. And so the irony is that he talks about it being revisionist, but the history that we have now is revisionist because it only paints America in the greatest light. And in our founding, you know, we are supposed to be this melting pot, right? That's what they told us. That's one of the things you learn. If you learn nothing else in history in school, is America's a melting pot. That's what diversity is all about. That's why the trainings are important. And that's also why this history is important. And at some point, it's not even just the history of African-American people. That's very important to tell because we were an integral part of what made this nation great. but we need to tell the story of every group that came here and helped to build this nation. And that needs to be a part of our overall history. And that's not really done. I mean, you know, sometimes in school you learn a little bit about the role that the Japanese played in building the country, like one moment in time. But otherwise, you would think that America was only consisted of white people and black people, and that the black people were all slaves, and then suddenly they weren't slaves anymore, and this nation was wonderful. And that's really how the story is told. So we need to really work hard at telling it differently and incorporating every group that played a big role in making America what it is today.
Lisa.
If his issue touched on what Jay kind of was adding to the pot, if his issue was, hey, I don't want to, if we're going to do this, let's do it. Let's start. Because historically, that person I mentioned earlier that we celebrate in Washington, D.C. is named after, he's actually historically considered the father of the transatlantic slave movement, because he was the first person to take a freed person across the Atlantic Ocean, and he took the natives of the island that he landed on, and he took them back to Spain. And so if we were going to take it back and say, hey, we're going to really talk about how slavery in North America was really happening. Let's talk. Hey, we can't start with Africans coming here. We've got to discuss the fact that we enslaved the Native Americans first, and they didn't hold up well to our sicknesses, and there was this big movement. Like, if that was the issue, I'd be like, hey, good job, Trump. Like, I'd be able to, hey, good job. But it's not. It's this narrative that the people who want to be comfortable with that story that we all learned, that Christopher Columbus landed here, and then the Pilgrims came, and then we did all this kumbaya stuff, that makes them comfortable, and they're wanting to keep that alive because he doesn't see the point. Don't listen. You got a couple months left, sir. Like, pay attention to COVID. I don't need you to don't step in here on here. Like, stay out of this area. We already know you don't value education because you put someone in charge of the education system that has zero credible education experience. And now you've just decided because someone told you it might be racist. No, it's not racist, sir. You are. Like, go, Kenny. I'm done. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna cuss.
Fine. So I liken the country and our history to, and I say this as a man. I don't say this because men and women are equally important to their families, but I liken the country to a man who's the head of his family in some sense, who has done some great things for his family. He's provided well for them. They live in a safe place. You know, they have safe, reliable transportation. The kids are getting good education. But daddy might have been a little bit of a mess in his 20s, right? And when you start learning some things about what happened and how it really went down and how mama and daddy stuck it out, but it wasn't all peaches and cream. It's just a part of history. And the truth, we all know, sets everybody free. And so as a country, our daddy is this country. And we're learning that even though in the year 2020, as far as I know in my knowledge, right, if there's a better place, I'm ignorant of it, to be born poor or born without something and then be able to utilize this capitalistic system and get an education and be born in the projects and live in a mansion later, or, you know, be the first generation to go to college and end up as a professor in an Ivy League school. This is the greatest country to live in terms of that process, if you are allowed to realize the American dream. So daddy did some good things for us. But when it's time to talk about the ugly truth, we can't pretend that it didn't occur. And so that's the analogy that I will use in this. What do you got, Keisha?
Well, to your analogy, which you have to understand the totality of somebody's history if you want to understand them, and if you don't want to repeat the same mistakes. The issue is that while in this version of the country, or taking your analogy, if you'd gotten to the point where your kids were now growing up and they were starting to find out the truth of, if you're the father and they're starting to find the truth about your history, and instead of using those as teachable moments, you instead said, well, I don't think I need to tell you anything about me and about what happened. All you need to know is that everything is good right now. And so now you're depriving them of the ability to, one, appreciate the journey to see how we got to where we are. And two, you're depriving them of the opportunity to really look within themselves and say, you know what, maybe because of my lineage, there's some stuff that was going on with dad that I need to watch out for with me, because we understand generational, generational curses and things that continue to go on.
Addiction.
But they don't want to face it. It's like, nothing to see here. Everything was good. And so where we are now is we are coming back upon a societal reckoning where we're running back into the same issues around Jim Crow, civil rights era, about rights when it came to Black and brown people, simply because America does not want to face its history. And people are taking it personally and saying, well, my grandparents may have owned slaves, but that has nothing to do with me. That informs the way you think about Black people. That informs the decisions you make and who you hire. That informs the way you think that Black people are lazy, or Black people are good for nothing, or Black people, or whatever, or Black people are less than. And what they don't realize is the more they try and push this narrative that we are all great, and that, slaves came over here because they were enslaved in Africa too, and now they're coming over here. That ain't no slave came from Africa be like, you know what, I'm gonna go try and be a slave over in the US because I think it's better over there. Like, that's not how that worked.
You mean they didn't say, I want to go work for white folks as a slave?
No, they didn't. They didn't say, you know what, white folks are better because, Black masters are just too hard on us. We can't do that. Nobody said that. And there is this discomfort that white people in particular have when it comes to facing their history. And unless, and I always say, change is a process, not an event. If you do not get comfortable with being uncomfortable and facing your stuff, you are never going to go through a shift or transform or be any different than you were back then. And they're going back to the ugliness that we had back in Jim Crow and the civil rights era.
All right. Jay, what do you got to add?
Well, I think a lot of people do want to go back to the ugliness of the Jim Crow era because they weren't suffering. They got to behave however they wanted, and they could use not only Black people, but poor people got used to, because white poor people were struggling through slavery as well, not as much as Black people were. But I think that a lot of this also comes down to integrity. America has prided itself on being this nation of such great character. That was how we became world leaders, right? That was how the world looked up to us at one point. But we, as a nation, we lack integrity at this point. And we were lacking it probably even before he took office, truth be told. When we look at some of our foreign policy, when we look at how we viewed other nations and how we've treated other nations and how we've been very imperialistic, and we've been, like, we're going to be the big brother and we're going to come in and tell you how to run your country for a long time. We just did it in secret. If you read books about the CIA and things that went on at the inception of the CIA and what went on in other nations that Americans knew nothing about, but was perpetuated at the hands of our government. When we look at things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, we've had an integrity problem for some time. It's just that we keep it secret. And now we can't any longer. And we have someone in office who doesn't have integrity, and he doesn't care that he doesn't, because he hasn't needed to thus far. And we have, unfortunately, elected officials who don't have integrity either, or they have trouble executing and demonstrating integrity because they will not hold him accountable. And this is part of why we have problems with our foreign policy, because other nations see us as hypocrites because we are not behaving with integrity. And if we can't tell the truth about our own history, and we don't, not only can we not tell it, but we don't want it told, because that's one thing. When you can't tell your history, but somebody can come to you and say, this is really how it went down. And then you're like, wow, I didn't know. Well, that's awful, but I'm glad you told me. No, that's not how we're responding to this. We don't want it told. That's a problem. That's a character problem. And unless we can work on those fundamental values as a nation, I don't see how it gets better. And I think the only way we can start to work on that, and I know this sounds really a cheesy plug for voting, but like, we got to vote, you know, put people in office who have more integrity than what we have in there right now. We need elected officials who will hold the president accountable and actually pay attention to what the Constitution says and follow it. We need someone in the Oval Office who will pay attention to our laws and follow them and respect them. We need someone who has shown integrity in his personal life. Because when you elect somebody who has lived his life without any integrity, without any accountability, seems not to even have a conscience, what do you expect? This was all probably pretty predictable. It is alarming, but not entirely surprising.
Yeah, and so that's important when you talk about responsibility and accountability, because people want to sweep the truth under the rug, because if the truth comes out, that holds them accountable, and accountability requires responsibility. Because I have these smart people around me right now on this screen, you guys are talking about bigger issues. I'm going to be this guy who points to self again, because I hope that it's encouraging the people who want to pretend that things don't exist. Even as a father today, I have a 20-year-old and a 28-year-old. I've told them, Keisha alluded to some of this. She wasn't talking about me specifically, but I've told them the good, the bad, and the ugly. No one else has to, right? So, you know, if something were to come out 20 years later and someone say, you know, your daddy does, they'd be like, yeah, and what? We know that, right? Because daddy's told them. And it's an interesting process, because my son was able to learn more about it. Like I said, hey, dude, you have this in your genetics. Maybe you shouldn't drink. Well, how many people do you know go through high school and 4 years of college and never had a drink? Apparently, I made an impression. Right? That's pretty rare. My daughter at 20, you know, interesting. She can't remember any of it. He remembers a little bit, but to her, it's like I'm just perfect, because even though I tell her, she can't remember any of it. So, but anyway, I just share that stuff as a personal anecdote, because I hope that it's encouraging for other people personally, and for maybe white people who don't want to take a look at their father as in this nation, truly the birth of this nation. What do you got, Elisa?
You know what? So at our school, children progress, and we have clusters of kids that never leave. In fact, we have a group of young adults right now that need to leave. No. But so as the students grow up, we summertime morphs into, at lunchtime, we do what we called awkward teen talk. And once I've spoken with all the parents, all the students would come into my office, and we would talk about what I was like as a teenager, or what their parents, you know, with the different things they wanted to talk about, specifically about teenagers, about being a teenager. And just recently, one of these young teenagers, they're now a young adult, they are just having a really hard time getting their young adultness going, if that makes sense. Like, and they feel they're so crushed by the fact that they can't keep going, that they are frozen in time. And I'm trying my hardest to work with them. But I had to go to this child's parent, because I know a huge amount about this child's parent's life. And I was like, hey, so when are you going to tell them? Like, and so this parent told me, well, you can tell them, but I don't want to. And I'm like, so I had to go and tell, well, I chose to, after the parent gave me the okay, this parent's dirt, so that the child could see that they were completely normal and right on schedule with their DNA. And that's what America needs to realize that we're doing. I overstep sometimes, but only with permission. And that's what, though, we need to realize. I saw a meme recently, and it was 9/11, never forget, slavery. You got to let that go. And we talk about the Alamo nonstop. And we talk about, you know, in Texas, we talk about Pearl Harbor nonstop. Like in Hawaii, we talk about that nonstop. There's regional things that people will speak about in their history nonstop, but don't talk about slavery. We can't accept that as a country we abused a huge amount of people, and some of our citizens are now citizens here by force. They are not citizens because somebody got on the boat. They or willingly got on the boat in their top hat and their tuxedo. They're citizens because they got on that boat by force, and they're in many ways lucky to have made it off that boat, because that boat was such a horrible, and so yeah. And so, but when you fail to do that, that's why we still require diversity training. If our education system taught history properly, we would be able to self-reflect. We could be like, man, we suck as a country. We got to do better. And that's where we have to, regardless of this cannot be a political, you can't take a political side in this. You have to take a human side in this and say, or academic side and say, even if you're a Trump supporter, this is too far. This is messing up our education system. We're pretending that something happened, and sugarcoating it has not done us any good thus far. And so we've got to open up, and we've got to learn our education better.
I have a question for Jay, and then Keisha, I'll let you take us out and I'll sign us off. Jay, why do you think it is such a large portion of this country feels like in order to hold on to what they have, others have to be vilified?
Well, I mean, I think when people want to hold on to what they have, that's a very self-centered place. So they are caring only about their position, and they see others as a threat. And that's a lot of what this comes down to. People see something different as a threat, a new person as a threat. And it's either a threat to their well-being or the things that they have or the progress they're going to make. So their thinking is very aggressive because they feel that they may be attacked or they're going to end up with less. And I think if that's how you see something, that's the lens through which you view a certain group of people, you won't ever give them a chance. You won't ever consider the value that they have. You won't ever consider that their experience may dictate something entirely different. Maybe they're not there to take anything from you, and maybe they're just there to survive as well. But as long as you see them as a threat, you don't recognize their humanity. And then you don't care what you do to them or how you treat them. You just know that you want what you want, and that you're not going to let them stand in the way of that. You're going to do whatever you need to do, whether it's kind, not kind, respectful, not respectful, to get what it is you want. And I think it's just a very self-centered, selfish way to be. And sometimes as Americans, we are. The truth of it is that as a culture, sometimes as Americans, we are very, very self-centered.
Sure, we all are. Keisha, question for you. And then after you answer that question, go ahead and take us out with whatever narrative you want, and then I'll sign us off. Why, since Nat Turner's sort of uprising in the countryside of Virginia, I believe it was, to go out and sort of kill white people to say, listen, we got to get out of here. We're going to do something about this. And by the way, in our last show, I diverge a little bit, whatever I'm looking for. I think Jay said no one's looking to go out and kill black people and kill Mexicans. Well, did my eyes say it all? There's some people out there right now who want to do that. But Keisha, the question back to you. Since Nat Turner, I can't think of anyone black who went out and just took out a bunch of white people. Like, this is my intent. I'm gonna go take out a bunch of white people today. Hadn't happened. Somebody tell me. There's been random violence. So why are white folks so afraid, certain white people like the Trump base, that what black people really want is revenge and not just to be safe and have equality?
And it's interesting because I had this conversation with somebody, a white lady, and I asked her, I was like, why are you so afraid of black and brown skin? Because she was talking about the looting, as a result of the Black Lives Matter protests and so on and so forth. And there was this video of this young black woman who was talking about the reason for the looting and how, we destroy property because you hold your property in higher esteem than you hold my life. And so there's this sense, my take on it is, they're so afraid of an uprising by Black people, and that Black people are all of a sudden going to wake up and say, you know what? I know what you guys did. You know what? Y'all have to pay for this, because they know what they did is so egregious. If it happened to them, they would want revenge. And so when they think about, if this was my family that was ripped apart, if this was my mother that watched my brothers and sisters be separated and sold, and she had to breastfeed the kids of the people who enslaved her and sold her kids. If this was—
she's pregnant, you're crossing your fingers. You don't know what the baby's going to look like.
Right. Because if they're light enough to pass, they may get some, a good life. If they're dark like you, then they're in the field with you. So they think about, and over again, they have this thing where when someone gets killed or something, they're like, oh, I can't imagine. But no, they can imagine, because they know if this happened to them, if this happened to their ancestors, to their grandparents, to their cousins, to their sisters, they know they would want revenge. And so the reason they're so afraid of us is because they're like, you know what? If this actually happened to me and my family, oh, we would be burning some stuff down.
Well, thank you for that answer. So here's what I'm going to add to that. Number one, count all the guns and ATVs and rifles and AR-15s and whatever, you name them, Glocks, 380s, 357 Magnums, 38 Specials. And then you go with the percentages of Black folks in the United States. Well, white folks own guns at a higher percentage than Black people do, and we're small percentages, and we got militias, and Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Donald Trump's base, I'm talking to you right now, you have nothing to worry about. You've got us outmanned. You have nothing to worry about. Another thing I'm gonna tell you, which could be another show. Just like everything, people tend to be tribal by nature. We live in a society where we have intermarriages, Black people marry white people marry Asian people, Asian marry East Indian people, et cetera, et cetera. But because in general, we live amongst our own and praise and worship with our own, like one place that never got integrated. Churches are integrated some, but they're primarily white churches, larger churches. But funeral homes never got integrated. Look around this country. Black people bury Black people and white people bury white people. That's a whole nother thesis, but in any case, here's my point. This idea of Black on Black crime that Black people repeat is ridiculous. Everyone does everything to their own for the most part. I don't know what the number is, 80%, 85, 90. But let's just pick 90 for now. 90% of the time, if someone marries you and you're white, it's gonna be a white person. If someone marries you and you're Black, it's gonna be a Black person. If someone marries you and you're Asian, it's gonna be an Asian person. If someone kills you and you're white, it's gonna be a white person. If someone kills you and you're Black, it's gonna be a Black person. If someone kills you and you're Asian, it's gonna be an Asian person. People are still tribal by nature. Mm-hmm. So this notion that Black folks are coming after you is not true. They're killing each other. Terrible thing to say, but stop being so afraid, y'all. Nobody's coming to get you. All right, so with that said, anybody got anything else for the wrap up?
I think that was all that needed to be said. Mic drop.
I know.
All right. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.